Can you imagine reaching the peak of your sports career, only to watch all the admiration and respect you earned vanish in an instant, just because you cheated? Cheating, whether it's match fixing, doping, or bending the rules, might give you an edge for a while, but it's also a surefire way to guarantee a spectacular downfall. A double-edged sword capable of turning legends into disgraced has-beens overnight. Number 7. Sylvester Carmouche. Being a good actor and a shameless trickster can open doors, or win you horse races. Sylvester Carmouche combined both skills to claim victory at the racetrack in 1990. That day, the fog was so thick you could barely see the track. But despite the conditions, the race wasn't canceled. And while watching horses run might not be the most thrilling thing for some people, if you're going to throw your money away betting, at least do it in high definition. Carmouche crossed the finish line, leaving his competitors far behind, so far that they didn't even see him go by. It didn't take long to figure out why. He never actually completed the race. He didn't even go around the track. He simply hid in a corner, waited for the others to complete their first lap, then trotted out of the fog for an easy win. The footage showed 8 horses on the first lap and 9 at the finish line. On top of that, the race's vet noticed that Carmouche's horse looked suspiciously fresh, barely covered in mud. The scheme cost him dearly. He was banned from racing for 10 years. Ironically, losing like usual might have worked out better for him. He only won 1 in 10 races anyway. Out of 53, he had just 5 victories. Number 6. Tonya Harding. Now we're stepping it up. This isn't about cheating to gain an advantage. It's about taking out the competition entirely. That's exactly what happened to Nancy Kerrigan in early 1994. Both she and Tonya Harding were favorites for the figure skating gold medal, but someone wasn't too confident in one of them and decided to make sure she wouldn't win. Tonya's husband and a friend hired a hitman to injure Nancy. Years later, the hitman himself admitted, "At first, her husband wanted me to cut her Achilles tendon, but I said no way." They settled on breaking her leg instead. On the day of the attack, both skaters were training in Detroit. The session was being recorded since it was the last before the competition. Thanks to that, everything was caught on tape. Nancy practicing, Nancy leaving the ice, and then the attack. The hitman came out of nowhere, struck her with a baton, and ran off. But in his panic, he crashed into a glass door before escaping. Nancy didn't break any bones, but the pain and shock kept her out of the national championships, which Tonya conveniently won. The plan was also meant to keep her out of the Olympics, but she recovered just in time. And what happened there? Almost poetic justice. Nancy took silver, while Tonya finished 8th. Once the truth came out, Tonya's husband, his friend, and the hitman were arrested. The hitman, by the way, got paid $7,000 to give her a bruise. Tonya didn't escape consequences either. Her title was stripped and she was banned for life. No more competing wanted anything to do with her. Number 5. Lance Armstrong. Even people who don't follow cycling know his name. And when your fame goes beyond your sport, it usually means you've reached legendary status. But the higher you climb, the harder the fall. And if you got there by doping, the fall from grace hits even harder. Armstrong, a 7-time Tour de France winner, almost retired with his secret intact. He walked away in 2013 without getting caught, but his luck ran out shortly after when an investigation exposed a massive doping ring in cycling. The riders had been using a substance designed to be undetectable by tests at the time. The evidence was so overwhelming that denying it would have been ridiculous. So Armstrong sat down for an interview and admitted, "It's humanly impossible to win 7 times without doping." His victories weren't really his. They were the result of chemistry. When asked about doping in cycling, he described it as a culture. "I didn't create it, but I didn't stop it either." That word says it all. Doping wasn't the exception. It was the rule. If you wanted to win, you gave in to temptation. His case led to stricter testing, but Armstrong wasn't the only one guilty. He was just the biggest name to fall. When asked if he regretted it, he answered, "No, because everyone else was doing it too." He was stripped of his titles and banned from competing, but already retired with millions in the bank. It's hard to say if he really cared. Number 4. Rosie Ruiz. A case similar to Sylvester Carmouche, but with a bit more sophistication. Instead of waiting at the finish line, she decided to save time by taking shortcuts. And it worked. She briefly became one of the fastest marathon runners in history. This happened at the Boston Marathon in 1980. Rosie Ruiz, originally from Cuba, crossed the finish line with record-breaking speed and even secured a spot in the Guinness Book of Records. But soon suspicions arose. Other runners commented, "We never saw her during the race." The reason? Simple. Ruiz veered off course early on, disappeared, and only reappeared near the end. To sell the act, she crossed the finish line, gasping for breath, pretending to be exhausted. During her post-race interview, a reporter asked if she had passed the official checkpoints. Ruiz confidently said yes. The reporter then replied, "That's strange. No one saw you go through any of them." Despite the doubts, she was given the trophy, the crown, and a round of applause, until an investigation confirmed she had cheated. And it didn't stop there. It turned out she had also cheated to qualify for the Boston Marathon. How? By taking public transportation during the New York Marathon. Number 3, Ben Johnson back to the Olympics. Ben Johnson won gold in the 100-meter sprint, but steroids and doping wiped his achievements off the record books. But everyone else was doing it, right? And if all your friends jump off a bridge, do you? Well, Johnson didn't just jump. He swan dived off. At the 1988 Seoul Olympics, Johnson won gold and set 2 world records. Then he tested positive. The punishment? The usual. Stripped of his medals, titles, and records, and suspended for years. But did he learn his lesson? Absolutely not. When his ban was lifted, he came back and tested positive again. The other finalists were doping too, he complained, as if that somehow justified it. This time, he was banned for life, though that didn't stop him from trying again. He ended up running solo because no one wanted to race against him. And even though his records were still officially recognized, guess what? He tested positive yet again. The funniest part? This time, they didn't even catch the actual performance-enhancing substance, just a compound designed to hide it. Ironically, there are ways to mask doping, but those masking agents can't hide themselves. Number 2, Barry Bonds. He was promised an undetectable substance that would give him an unbeatable edge. And since some people want everything at any cost, Barry Bonds said, "Sign me up." Not only did he use steroids, but he also became a supplier. And when he was taken to court, instead of confessing like Armstrong, he chose to lie. Strangely enough, there was no conviction. But in the world of baseball, he's seen as a stain on the sport. His records, along with those of Mark McGwire, Roger Clemens, and Sammy Sosa, were denied entry into the Hall of Fame. Their names remain in the official record books, but to many they don't deserve to be remembered. Number 1, the Paralympic Games scandal. Doping is bad enough, but pretending to have a disability to compete in the Paralympics? That's next-level fraud. Most of the athletes on this list cheated to gain unfair advantages, but this group took it a step further. They exploited a condition that wasn't even theirs. At the 2000 Sydney Paralympic Games, the Spanish basketball team had only 2 players with real disabilities. The rest, as they later admitted, just pretended to be slow so they could qualify. Intellectual disabilities had been added to the games in 1996, but testing was so lax that several countries took advantage of the loophole. Spain was just the most blatant offender. The advantage was obvious. They won the gold medal with ease, but everything fell apart when one of their own players, who also happened to be a journalist, exposed the scam. Thanks to him, the fraud wasn't just revealed in basketball. Swimming, track and field, even ping pong had also been tainted by fake athletes. The scandal was so big that even South Park made an episode about it. Now the most curious part, the journalist knew about the fraud before the games. So why didn't he report it earlier? Well, I guess as a journalist, he thought, why report it early when I can get a great story out of it? 2 weeks later, Spain was disqualified, the medals were returned, and the stain left on the Paralympics was hard to erase. The committee, unable to prevent this from happening again, removed the intellectual disability category for the 2004 Athens and 2008 Beijing Games. It was only reinstated in 2012 in London, with much stricter verification. But if no one had exposed them, how would they feel looking at those medals? Because there's one thing worse than cheating, being proud of it. Subscribe to our channel for more content like this, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The Mind Odyssey just began.